Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but the truth is in trouble recently. Lately, fact-based reality is hard to come by. Humanity is just being swept away in a great tsunami of misinformation. The internet is an overwhelming deluge of information, and we're absolutely addicted to it, people. The bottomless feeds, algorithms giving us constant dopamine hits, the blue light keeping us up. We're junkies. We're like literally addicted. Being without our phones' Wi-Fi signal makes many of us feel genuinely panicked. It makes us feel naked and vulnerable and out of control. And it's been like this for a while, but the problem we have now is that we're struggling to tell what information we see online is fact and what is not. Anyone can manipulate the presentation of information digitally to make the information look like it contains truth about reality, about what is actually going on. Anyone can package information to look like a real news story now. Anyone can post a photo with the wrong context, and it's not just your grandparents on their WhatsApp groups or your parents on Facebook telling you the aliens are here and half of them are the Democrats. Americans in the crowd enjoyed that one. Okay. Just 2 weekends ago, many South Africans saw a piece of information that looked like a Google search result saying that the Department of Basic Education was adding grade 13 to all schooling next year. Now, obviously, they're not doing that, but within hours, this information had been seen millions and millions of times on TikTok. At the end of the weekend, journalists had fact-checked the story and proven it false. Government officials made statements saying that the grade 13 claim was nonsense. Far fewer people, though, saw those clarifications than saw the original posts. Fortunately, the country found out in the end, so this was a relatively harmless incident of disinformation spreading and making people think that something was fictional, something that was fictional was true. But it's concerning, people. So many were duped by essentially just words written in the font that Google uses. That's it. There was no deep fake here, it was just words. Now imagine people are duped by some information that causes instant harm, that provokes people into destructive action. Now, journalists eventually responded to this false claim, but the internet is a bottomless pit. Fact checkers can't deal with all of the falsehoods. They can't deal with all of them quickly or decisively. And it's only going to get worse. Generative AI now allows anyone to create pictures that look real, that even us children of the internet can't quickly tell are digital hallucinations. And some generative AI can even create videos that look real now. I'm using the term digital hallucinations for these fictional posts that look real or claim to be showing some true facts, but because hallucinations seem real, but they aren't. But they make us feel like it's real. They make a claim to be real, and it's up to us to figure out that they aren't. That's what we're dealing with right now on the internet. So journalists now have this new enemy to fight, this massive digital hallucination pandemic. That makes the task of seeking and defending truth so much harder for a news media industry that is already buckling under another challenge brought by the internet. The rise of big tech search engines and social media giants has beaten news media companies to their knees, like Drake. Why was that deep? What, Drake fans in the house? All right, okay. So, girl, have you been online in the last year? A minor. To understand how news media has been beaten to its knees, we need to understand how the news media industry used to work and still tries to work. Back before easy access, affordable internet, and digital devices, newspapers, radio, and TV stations would be the sources of news, right? The sources of truth. Everyone would go to them for the news. News media stake their reputations on being reliable sources of fact. That's how they attracted readers, listeners, and viewers. And they sold advertising on their publications to pay for the journalism. And that model worked pretty well. It wasn't perfect. If you couldn't get a news company to tell your story, nobody would ever find out about it. And powerful people could get away with bad deeds through connections that they had with media owners. But on balance, back then, news media made enough money to hire enough journalists to properly cover the news, balance the workload so they could do their jobs well, and paid them enough to keep the best talent working for a long time. Then along came the internet, and particularly social media. Facebook alone caused millions and millions of people to start using the internet more than ever before. And quite quickly, using the internet became everyday, normal life. And suddenly, you could get the news from the internet without having to wait for the newspaper or the TV or the radio show, and without having to pay for it. That was the first big shock to news media. And then over a few years, more and more people switched from traditional media to getting their fix on Facebook or the dark place formerly known as Twitter or YouTube. News media lost audiences and so lost advertising revenue because they didn't have as big an audience to sell as before. Now, news media tried to adapt by putting more of their work online, but the struggle to sell advertising online for as much money as before because they had a smaller audience. Journalists found that they had to post links to their work on social media to get attention. But that often meant readers would see the headline on social media and a few lines from the article embedded on Facebook or Twitter. And then they just never clicked through to the article, meaning the news media didn't get the website visit or page view, and so couldn't count that read as part of their audience to sell to advertisers. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Because then it got way worse. Because all of these internet giants also make their money from selling audience to advertisers, just like news media. Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, the dark place formerly known as Twitter, they all make revenue the same way that news media does. And the internet giants created and released programs that allowed anybody to advertise on their platforms with ease. These advertising systems were incredibly attractive to businesses. Firstly, they were cheap to advertise through, cheaper than news media companies. Secondly, they were incredibly easy to use, easier than news media. You could place an ad on Facebook or Google in a few minutes and have people seeing your ad just a few minutes after that. And then thirdly, the internet giant advertising services are much better than news media at getting you exactly the audience that you want your ad to see, or to see your ad. The giants are collecting and crunching all of their users' information, meaning you can be hyper-specific with your advertising. If you want the last people in South Africa who still love Drake, they can find out that they're all here at the Dan Corder Show. It's very straightforward. If you want a 34 to 45-year-old man in Durban with a car and a family and these views and those habits, Google and Facebook can get you exactly that man. News media can't do that. They can't guarantee who will be watching or listening to a given show before it happens, or who will be reading a certain newspaper edition. And they don't have granular data on who all is in their audience. At best, they can speculate to a degree of accuracy, but not further. So you can see how advertising online is so attractive. And all of this is absolutely slamming the news media, people. Companies are struggling to make the money they need to pay journalists and do good work. Journalists are being forced to write as many articles as possible every day to try and get audience through quantity. But that means they aren't able to do thorough, deep research and go really find out what's going on in the world. They're overworked and they're burnt out. They're paid very little, meaning top talent leaves for better paying jobs outside of the news. And the massive frustration in news media is that the Googles and Facebooks of the world are making money off of the journalists' work. They're not writing the news. And people still want and need the news. But then they go to Facebook or Google or TikTok to get it, and Google pulls information from articles and presents it at the top of news searches now. So you don't need to go and click on any news website in the search to find out the news. Google has also got automated questions and answers now. The number one question about Dan Corder is Dan Corder married? Which is very weird. Both because I'm not, and because why are you asking Google that question? And all of this keeps you on Google, meaning they sell your view to advertisers rather than going to the news media company that made the news in the first place. Google is just extracting the work like a mining company from the journalists and pocketing the money. Facebook is doing the same. Dark place known as Twitter is doing the same, except with Nazis. And many news media companies are now forced to use Google's advertising programs to run advertising on their own sites. And Google takes significant cuts of that advertising also. News media companies have no choice but to go with Google because it has such a total monopoly on searches and advertising. Quick question for the room. Has anybody asked Bing or Binged? Yes. More than Google? No. Thought so. Okay. You guys sounded so sad for Bing. You were like, no. Shame, little Bing. So what I'm trying to tell you is journalism is being hollowed out. Internet giants are making their fortunes, and all the while, misinformation is spreading on every platform online, through every device, into all of our lives. It's genuinely a disastrous situation, the likes of which humans have never encountered before. We need more journalists with more time to work and better pay to keep working. And slowly, authorities around the world are now waking up to the crisis and trying to figure out ways to stop it. The common sense solution, as I'm sure you've been thinking, is to make internet giants pay compensation to news media for repurposing their material and making ad revenue off of it. That way, people get the news, and news media can afford to make the news well. But Google and Meta aren't so keen on sharing. Some years ago, Europe introduced the European Copyright Directive, which allows for content publishers to be paid when the material is reused by digital giants in their searches, including the article title and excerpts from the pieces that we all see on Facebook if we're over the age of 50. Google has been accused of not complying with this directive in Europe. The company has been fined twice by France for not having negotiated in good faith with news media. Now, guys, I wonder if you can tell how badly Google broke the law by how much they had to pay in the fines. The first fine was 9.7 billion rand. Probably a pretty big mistake. The second one, 4.8 billion, for a total of over 14 billion rand in just 2 fines. Now, Google has responded to the Europeans like a mafia boss, people. Like Tony Soprano. Do you know what they did? More people need to know about this. Google created what they called a test to see how valuable news really is and if people really care about the news. This is what they did. They took 1% of all the users of Google from 8 European countries and hid articles from news media from European countries from those users. So if anyone in that 1% from Denmark, Belgium, Spain, Greece, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, or Croatia, Google searched a news story, they wouldn't see reporting on that story from a ton of European publishers. So Google literally cut off readers from news media and decimated those news media's audiences, thus decimating their advertising revenues, which is crazy. This is literally a shakedown. It's a power play and a threat. It's like the construction mafia in South Africa. It's so wild. The message is, don't mess with us or we will literally destroy you. You need us. Submit or lose everything. Now, France managed to block Google from doing this test in France, but the test started in Denmark before the Danes could do anything. I think they need to call the French lawyers because the French lawyers are on a winning streak. Nobody else is. Facebook is also moving in mafia ways. Canada made a law requiring internet giants to pay news media for repurposing their content. And in response, Facebook said, fine, we'll just remove news content from Facebook then. Facebook and Instagram will just block all news media. They already did it in Australia. So they are moving mad about this. And what is South Africa trying to do? Last week, the Competition Commission in South Africa released a report from a more than year-long investigation. And the report found that Google made around 800 million rand to 900 million rand off South African news media content in just 2023, while the news media only made 200 million from their work that same year. It's a 600 to 700 million rand difference that Google extracted from news media here. The Commission recommends that Google compensate our news media between 300 million rand and 500 million rand a year over the next 3 to 5 years to compensate news media for mining its material. After that, the Commission recommends that Google give news media between 5% and 10% of its earnings from South African news content per year so that our news media can sustain themselves and do their vital work. Now, I need to tell you, you may not be surprised, Google is fighting back. They claim radically different numbers. In fact, Google's representative says that they made only 35 million rand off of South African news media content in the year 2022. Now, the South Africans in the room, 35 million rand wouldn't even catch your attention in a fraud corruption trial in this country. Do you really think that Google made only 35 million rand from all the advertising of all South African news media in 2022? The Guptas would have turned a 35 million rand deal down. 35 million rand in 2022 versus 800 to 900 million rand in 2023. That difference is absolutely insane. And I really struggle to believe that all the stories and coverage of all of the news from South Africa's journalists amounted to just 35 million rands worth of ad revenue a year. But Google will certainly fight this hard, and they will likely deploy similar mafia tactics here like they have against stronger, wealthier countries around the world. But I, for one, I have to tell you, I'm excited because this fight needs to happen, like yesterday. Because until we have this fight, South Africa is just sleepwalking into a crisis of truth and fact-based reality where some teachers thought that grade 13 was coming in 9 months' time from a TikTok. That is the crisis we're facing and sleepwalking into. Already, our country is so vulnerable to fake news and unanswered nonsense. It's leading us astray, causing division, and making us doubt each other and the truth about our country and the world. The sooner we force a change that can bring back money to journalism, the better. It's absolutely vital to all of our lives and our democracy that we have truth-seeking journalism to rely on. That's literally the only way we can all agree on what is really true about life, existence, and our world.